Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 2020 Central Pacific Hurricane Season Outlook. My name is John Bravender. I'm the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service Central Pacific Hurricane Center. Every year we look forward to the Hurricane Season Outlook as an excuse to get together. It's one of those rare chances we get to see everybody in person, not during an ongoing emergency. And it looks like we've struck out on both those counts this year. With that in mind, I want to thank you on both counts. Number one, for your flexibility in joining us through this virtual method as we work out all the kinks trying to do this for the first time. And number two, for your time. To our speakers that you'll be hearing from momentarily, and to everybody in the audience, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us for this. We rely on all of you to make Hawaii prepared and resilient as we head into hurricane season. At the National Weather Service, we make forecasts and warnings of life-threatening events, but those warnings do no good if people don't receive them and they don't know what to do about them. So that's why it's great to bring such a wide range of folks from the media and emergency management programs together with us for this event. Hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to get together in person and renew the relationships we've developed over the years. But for now, we'll make do like this. And today I'm joined by several important officials, and we appreciate them joining us, giving us time out of their day. And I'd like to thank them for their continued support as we work to further our mission of protecting life and property. With that, I would like to first introduce Governor David Ige for opening remarks. Governor?
Good afternoon. Thanks, John, so much for convening all of us. I know that many have been focused on another threat, responding to COVID-19 and keeping our community healthy and safe. But as we all know, we must turn our attention to the 2020 hurricane season. We appreciate your help and efforts to get important information out to our residents, what we might expect from the next hurricane season this year, and a reminder of how to prepare and protect ourselves and our families, and most importantly, our loved ones. We must remember that hurricane season brings with it the threat of hurricanes, destructive winds, lots of rain and flooding that can wreak havoc within our communities and impact the lives of thousands of residents all across our state. Now is the time for everyone, residents and businesses all alike, to prepare for the possibility of a hurricane. Talk to your families, talk amongst your colleagues at work, and the organizations that you are so active in to really ensure that everyone has an emergency action plan. You know, we don't want to get into an emergency situation without each and every one of our citizens having an emergency action plan. Be sure to prepare your emergency kit as recommended.
You want to come and show me? Because no, I don't know what you're looking at.
Of food, water, and supplies. I'm hoping that most families already stocked up to some extent as part of the COVID-19 response. But we need to remind everyone that the hurricane season is coming and everyone should check their emergency kits. I know that as we return to the retail stores, certainly it seems like the supplies of the most critical requirements are in stock in the stores once again, so that's always a good sign. I just want to encourage everyone as we start the hurricane season to relearn and revisit about the hurricane hazards and warnings, take measures to protect yourself, your friends, your families, and your neighbors, and really make sure that planning ahead and preparing is the best thing that each and every one of us can do as we enter this hurricane season. So thanks so much, John, for including me. Aloha.
Thank you very much, Governor. We appreciate the time. Now I would like to turn to Lieutenant Governor Green for additional remarks. Lieutenant Governor?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Gov. Very good to see you, Mayor Caldwell, Mayor Victorino, team, Luke. So in addition to being pleased to be a part of this, just a couple points I wanted to add to the governor's very strong points. As we know, this has obviously been an unprecedented year for us with the COVID crisis, which you guys have made an extraordinary successful response out of, keeping people alive. But I do know that because of where we are in the calendar year after people being at home for some time, there is a strong likelihood that people may be a little more reluctant to follow instructions in terms of a crisis. That could happen. And you always are a very strong voice, Governor and Mayor Caldwell, Mayor Victorino, when you come to the podium during these crises. But because of the frustration, we should be mindful of that. It's just something I wanted to mention, because we know that these are challenging times. In addition to that, we're arguably at our most vulnerable because so many people are out of work. And when people are vulnerable like this, they tend to take risks. And it's something we should, again, be mindful of. It's just natural. It's human nature when people are struggling that some risks get taken. So as the strong orders and the direct orders come, if we have a big hurricane, again, I'm concerned about that. But that's why I'm glad people are kind of chiming in now. The other things I might mention are we've seen about a 60% decrease in people going, obviously, to their primary care doctors and to the hospitals for basic things because of the obvious home quarantine and the restrictions that have been necessary to keep people alive. But that means what we've found as we've talked to people and polled people is a lot of people don't have that 14-day supply of their medications like they often have had, or 2 or 3 months in some cases. So this is probably a very good time to remind people that being stocked up on their medications, if they haven't done it for obvious reasons in the recent past, that they should do that. We would really not want to see people go a long period of time without their medications. Finally, I would just say this is an opportunity, because we've already had some of our emergency kits in place, just to be very mindful of which of our neighbors has been hurting more than others, and for our friends to reach out to their neighbors to find out if they have extra supplies to help spread them that way. Not talking about hoarding toilet paper, although that was a bummer, but really there's got to be a lot of loving friendship in the community, because our kupuna have been unable to get out, and for the right reasons. So these are the kind of considerations that I've been tracking. But I'm so glad to be part of this team with you guys, all of you. And I think if we reach out to our folks and get them their medicines and so on, we're going to be okay. Probably can't be quite as lucky as last year with hurricane season, but you guys have provided great leadership through the first crisis. So hopefully this next one will be okay too. But thank you again.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. We appreciate you joining us. Now I would like to turn to Mayor Caldwell, who's joining us from the Honolulu Department of Emergency Management Emergency Operations Center. Mayor?
Aloha, John. It's I have to say it's kind of good to hear your voice. I usually when I hear it, I worry about a hurricane, but with what we've been dealing with, it's somewhat reassuring to hear your voice. And I again want to say aloha to the governor and the lieutenant governor and to Mayor Victorino from the county of Maui. We've been in a marathon, since March, and I know our folks at each of our EOCs, top down, starting with the governor all the way down, have really been doing an incredible job. And I think there is fatigue in our EOCs. And now we enter into a hurricane season that lasts through the summer and into the fall, while we continue to climb out and fight the pandemic, and opening up our community and opening it up to inter-island travel at some point, to travel from outside of the state while we work through this hurricane season. And there is concern on the part of folks on Oahu that with that fatigue, that they continue to pay close attention to what you do, John. And as we enter into the hurricane season, as NOAA and the National Weather Service issues alerts, that people take them extremely seriously, that they pay attention to what you're saying, and that they follow all the recommendations given by all of us, starting with the governor, the mayors, and others. And so, for example, things like our 14-day kit that we have, I would assume that many of them have been somewhat decimated during the pandemic. They have supplies, but they're working through them. And so one recommendation from Oahu is that folks on this island go back and look at your 14-day kit, make sure it's replenished, make sure it's sufficient to get you through this hurricane season, and also, make sure you have what you need in terms of dealing with the pandemic. And reaching out to your neighbors, particularly the seniors in your neighborhood, to make sure they have what they need, and if they don't, to help them acquire it. The other thing that's going to be a first for all of us, should a hurricane approach our shores and we have to actually start talking about sheltering, we have the issue of people leaving in particularly dense urban Honolulu and going to shelters at whether it be schools or local parks and recreation gyms, that we do so with social distancing in mind, or physical distancing and face covering. And it will mean that our shelter space, we're going to have to be more spread out. And at the same time, we probably need more shelter space. And then how do people go into that shelter? We're going to be working closely with the American Red Cross, with the Department of Health, and how we screen people, whether we do thermal screens, temperature taking when people go in, what happens if someone has a temperature, where are they sent and how are they protected as we continue to deal with the pandemic. These are unique new challenges that no one has faced. I mean, the East Coast has maybe started to address it with the hurricane season starting early there. But again, it's about all of us working together in these next steps. And it's comforting to see we're together here today. And I can't wait to see what John has to say about the upcoming hurricane season. I hope he's going to say that it looks pretty good through November. But we'll be listening. We'll be ready to respond and work together, whatever your outlook is. Thank you so much. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now we'd like to turn to Mayor Victorino, who's joining us from the Maui Emergency Management Agency Emergency Operations Center. Mayor Victorino.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, John, and for what you do each and every year. Nice to see all the other mayor and the governor. That I haven't seen you guys in a long time. It's been almost an hour and a half. I mean, that's too long, guys. Come on now. Anyhow, we meet so often that it's like we don't see each other. We haven't seen each other live, but boy, that virtual reality has become a part of our lives. And I think this year, all of what you said, I'm not going to repeat because that's exactly how we feel. But virtual reality has become a really important part of this pandemic. And I think it's going to become more important if we were to have a hurricane, how our infrastructure can survive any kind of major hurricane, whether it's this island or any island, or if my worst case scenario is if Oahu gets hit and gets hit profoundly, the rest of us are up a creek with no paddle. I say it literally and figuratively, and I mean it. For us in Maui, we're prepared, but again, we got a lot of challenges. How do we do it this time around that we haven't had to do in the last many years that we've had different emergencies? So I'm looking forward to what you have to say, John. And if it's not good news, let me know now. I'll hang up and I'll go and do something else. Thank you, John. And nice seeing all of you. Aloha.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Robert Fenton, who's the administrator of FEMA Region 9.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me. And good afternoon to the governor, lieutenant governor, and the mayors there of Honolulu and Maui. I'm pleased here to join NOAA and the National Weather Service today for the announcement of this year's Pacific hurricane season forecasts. And I look forward to NOAA sharing the upcoming hurricane season forecast. But whether we expect to see an above or below average season, we need to stay prepared. And I'm here to share ways we can all be ready. Disasters won't wait, neither should you. As we continue our efforts with the whole of America to respond to and recover from coronavirus, we are also leaning forward and preparing for the upcoming hurricane season. One way that you can prepare is by knowing what to do when disasters happen. FEMA's ready.gov/hurricanes website offers useful information online on how to prepare for the hurricane season during the pandemic. In the state of Hawaii, individuals and families should have a plan to have a 14-day supply of food and water in preparation for a hurricane. Hurricanes can lead to unpredictable flooding, and it's important to stay prepared. As you remember, just 2 years ago, Hawaii experienced widespread flooding damages from hurricanes and tropical storms that produce heavy rains, storm surges, and ocean swells. There's really no more important or valuable disaster recovery tool than insurance. This includes flood insurance, which is not included in the standard homeowners or renters policies. So renew your flood insurance today by visiting floodsmart.gov/renew today to learn more about how you can renew before the next storm hits. Also, preparing your home now for hurricanes can mean the difference between minor damage and complete destruction. Taking these steps can give you peace of mind so that you are ready for this year's hurricane season. Back to our message for this hurricane season. Disasters don't wait, neither should you. Take action now, because it only takes one storm to threaten your life or your home. Simple steps taken now make a difference. Thanks, John, for having us on. Look forward to the forecast.
Thank you very much, Bob. Now I would like to turn to Mr. Luke Myers, Administrator of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. Luke? Luke, can you unmute your microphone?
Good afternoon, John. Good afternoon, Governor, and other representatives of the state. Welcome to the Hawaii Emergency Operations Center. We've been activated for over 85 days with federal, state, and local partners in battling COVID. The team here has been working through some unprecedented times, and this hurricane season will be nothing different. As we head into this season, we must look at potentially multiple waves of COVID-19, whether it's now or as we go into the fall. And as the Mayor Caldwell and the Governor has said, and Mayor Victorino, all of our emergency support functions are taking activities to lean into that and to consider COVID. Hurricane season comes with a number of threats here to the islands, including areas that flood, things that slide, and areas that get wet. We need you all to take actions to prepare for those. One of our biggest threats here on the islands is actually coastal inundation or storm surge. With the existing vulnerabilities that we have, there are some specific actions that you can take. We have 6 calls of action for the public we'd like to take today on top of battling COVID-19, which has had tremendous impacts here in the state. The first one, get to know your hazards. If you have areas of your property where you live, work, and play that flood, we all know that in Hawaii, many areas are dry, but as soon as things get wet, we have flash flooding. So know the hazards on your property. Number 2, communications. Sign up for your county community alert systems, whether it's HNL Info or it's the systems in Maui, Kauai, or on the Big Island. Number 3, develop a plan. Without a plan, without a way ahead, you're kind of out of luck. So develop a plan with you and your family and your loved ones. Number 4, we've all talked about 14 days and having supplies and kits. And obviously COVID-19 has really stretched commodities and liquidity here in the state. So we challenge you all to develop a kit and have a plan. But for this year, we want you to include mask and hand sanitizer. Those are traditionally items we have never included in our 14-day kits, which we want you all to include. 5, we want you to consider flood insurance. As Mr. Fenton called out, one of the cheapest forms of mitigation is having flood insurance. With the areas of our state that can get wet, you don't have to live in a floodplain to get flood insurance, but it's a very strong investment. And number 6, this is kind of above, look at a home retrofit, such as hurricane shutters or tying your roof down to your foundation. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you all. You in the community need to take this time, find a loved one or friend, give them a hug, check in to see how they're doing. As Mayor Caldwell called it out, we are in a marathon. And when we overlay hurricane season on this marathon, it's going to turn into a triathlon. So we really, really need to be prepared. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Luke. Now we'll turn to Maria Lutz, Regional Disaster Officer for the American Red Cross. And as we do this, I'm going to turn off the other webcams and share the screen so give a little more clear input as to who is speaking, even though, or ask the speakers to turn off their screens as well.
Okay, hi, this is Maria Lutz with the American Red Cross. And this year, as all the other panelists have been touching upon, this is a far different year. With the advent of COVID-19, we will need to adjust Hawaii's hurricane evacuation shelter strategy. And it's going to need to incorporate mitigation measures. Red Cross will be working together with county emergency management and public health to create a shelter environment that can support social distancing. Other measures that will be adopted will be frequent cleaning and disinfecting of common surfaces and performing health screening and temperature checks for people before they enter the shelters. And as Luke just touched on, we also have the addition to our shelter kits to make sure that we have masks included. If people do not have masks, they will be supplied masks if they need to come to a hurricane evacuation shelter. What has not changed is that we still need to bring all of our emergency supplies that we can, as much as we can, to the shelter with us. The key items that you should focus on are water, of course. Water is the key to life. You want to bring a gallon of water per person per day. You also would want to bring shelf-stable meals or canned food with you. And if you do bring canned food, please remember to also include a can opener. On the individual level, you also want to make sure that you have life-saving medication with you if you are dependent upon that, and also to have a blanket, because bedding is typically not provided in a hurricane evacuation shelter. So please make sure that you have these key items for your sustenance and for your comfort. We ask these people to bring these items because when you're in a hurricane evacuation shelter, obviously during this time, we'll be experiencing high winds, heavy rains, and most likely the electricity could go out and the water pressure and just the water system could also stop. And so there may not be these supplies readily available at the hurricane evacuation shelter. So we want to make sure that people have access to what they need to survive. So with these a couple weeks here right before hurricane season, please take the time to restock your kits as these senior leaders have been encouraging you to do also. And if you have time and the passion and the interest, please think about joining the Red Cross. We help staff hurricane evacuation shelters, and we also help staff shelters for all other kinds of needs throughout the year. If you're interested and have the time to volunteer, please go ahead and check out redcross.org and look at volunteer opportunities, because we're always looking for more people and more helpful people here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now I would like to turn to Dennis Hwang from the University of Hawaii Sea Grant.
Hi, John.
Hey, Dennis.
Okay, let me just get started quick. Hello, everyone, Governor and mayors. It's good to see you all. I'm Dennis Hwang with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant. We wanted to mention that the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Natural Hazards, the 4th edition, is now online, and it's a free PDF. Here's the web link. What's different is we added 2 new hazards, volcanoes and climate change, but because it's the beginning of hurricane season, we wanted to mention there's a lot of new hurricane retrofit measures in the book, and we think these are really important. Getting material from the book. Here is our hurricane preparation to do. 14-day supply of food and water and other medication. We've already covered that. We've been told we need to add sanitizer and face masks. That's important. People really need to get an emergency plan, and specifically they need to know where they're going to go, either their place, a friends or relatives, or a public shelter as a last resort. People need to consider the triple threat from a hurricane: storm surge, rain, and wind, and each threat by itself can prevent you from sheltering in your home. We encourage people to work on their house, and we know it's very difficult now. A lot of people are in difficult financial condition, but here are some low-cost action items, and they start with things that are very small, and they go to things that are reasonable, okay? So 1, clear debris, clutter, and junk in your yard and around the house. This will reduce wind risk if there is a windstorm. You don't want flying wind debris. Clear drains, rain gutters, and downspouts. Okay, you want to make sure rain could get off your roof. You want to make sure rain could get off your property. Okay. C, maintain your house. You do not want wood rot or termite damage. You want to have proper maintenance and inspections. If you don't do proper maintenance and inspections over time, the structure of your house will weaken. So you want to prevent the wood rot and termite damage. And then we're going to add one retrofit measure. We think it's very reasonable and it's not that hard to do, and we're going to cover it quickly. Add hurricane clips, really to tie your roof to the wall, specifically for houses on Oahu, those built on or before '88, Maui on or before 1990, and for Kauai, and for Hawaii County on or before 1994. And for more advanced items, download the free edition of the Homeowner's Handbook, and we're also attend a free virtual webinar that we're going to give. Also, FEMA mentioned have your insurance, hurricane, and flood. And remember, these cannot be purchased during an incoming event. A lot of times there's a 30-day waiting period. Okay, I just like to cover the triple threat from a hurricane. Okay, so there's obviously the wind. Here's a Niki hitting Kauai. There's the wind, and the right front quadrant is always the worst. So there's a storm surge, the wind blowing onto the coast. Here's the storm surge. And then there's the flooding, rain, and it's particularly bad along river or stream systems, such as Waimea or Hanapepe River. Okay, during Niki, hundreds and maybe thousands of houses, the roof was blowing off. And in 2018, Lane had threatened to do the same thing to Oahu. There are 8 times more structures on Oahu than Niki. But the good news is almost every house in the state could be retrofitted at a relatively low cost. This hurricane clip helps to keep the roof on. That's why we think it's the first retrofit people should do. It's not that hard. And already 2,500 homes in Hawaii have already been retrofitted. In terms of the triple threat and where you're going to go during a hurricane, remember flooding, storm surge, and wind. Here's your flood map, and the book provides where you look up your flood map for each hazard, so each homeowner can know what the risk is. And it's important to look at both. And I'm going to give a quick example of Wailupi Peninsula on the South Shore. You look at this flood map. Here's the red coastal V zone associated with waves, and here's blue inland stream flooding. You just look at the flood map, and it's okay to shelter here during a hurricane. But if you just look at the storm surge map, it's not okay to shelter there, and it's okay to shelter along this Wailupi stream, which a flood map indicates could be a problem. So that's why you need to look at both of these maps, and it's also important to wait for instructions from local emergency management, because this storm surge map is a worst case scenario, It assumes a category 3 or 4 hurricane, and it assumes the right front quadrant of the hurricane is hitting this area, which may not be the case. Now, the third threat of the triple threat is wind. In order for you to shelter in your house for wind, it needs to be strong enough. And remember the story about the 3 little pigs, straw, wood, and stone, and the big bad wolf? Well, here we have a single wall house, a double wall house, and a stone house. The double wall house is inherently stronger than the single wall house. The stone house is inherently stronger than the double wall house. And here we have unsafe, marginal, good, better, and best. The goal is to move the house to the right so you're more likely to be able to shelter in place. And every house, even if there's difficulties, they should be able to at least put their house from poor condition to good condition by, proper maintenance. And then our first step, if people were able to put their house in good condition and add hurricane clips, they could move further along and make it more likely to shelter in place, less likely they'll need to go to a shelter. And then these other retrofits will cover in our virtual webinar, okay? There's not enough time to cover it today. Just like to mention that it's June 4th from 5 to 6 p.m. People need to register online. It's with Sea Grant and all the county emergency managers. We're gonna cover window protection, hurricane clips, foundation upgrades. We wanna mention these things can be done. This homeowner did everything imaginable, and now it's gonna be able to shelter 20 relatives in their house during an event, relieving burdens for these shelters. And he also convinced 25 houses to retrofit. And we want to try and do this to protect families and homes. So here's the last slide. Here's National Weather Service, and John is going to distribute this, but we encourage people to attend the free virtual webinar. You do need to register for it, and we'll be covering all of these items, and here are the participants. So that's all I have for today.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Now we'll turn to Kevin Kodama, the Senior Service Hydrologist with the National Weather Service, for a wet season review and an outlook for the upcoming dry season. Kevin?
Hey, thanks, John. Before we get to my boss's presentation regarding what we're going to be expecting for the hurricane season, I'm going to be covering real quick what we received during the season we just finished, which is the October through April wet season, and then go into what we're expecting in terms of rainfall for the dry season. So going back to the start of the wet season in October, which really feels like 10 years ago now, we started the wet season with severe to extreme drought over parts of the Big Island and Maui County, and moderate drought over leeward portions of Oahu. The worst drought, the extreme drought, was really over fairly small pockets, but the impacts were definitely felt out there. Now, going on to the start of the wet season, some of you may recall that we were in ENSO neutral conditions, which is in between El Nino and La Nina states. Now, the background map you're seeing there is the total rainfall that we received in the October through April timeframe, expressed as a percentage of average. And the green colors are near normal rainfall, and the blues and the purples are above average rainfall, and the yellows and oranges are below average rainfall. Fortunately, we didn't have any reds, which would be really, really dry conditions. But in October, we made the forecast that called for above average rainfall during the wet season. And that was due to the consensus of climate models indicating that we would have enhanced rainfall. And also because there's a tendency during ENSO neutral conditions to have wetter than normal conditions during the October through April timeframe. So at the end of April, when we tabulated all the numbers, it showed that we had above average rainfall at many locations. However, most of Maui County and portions of the Kohala region over on the Big Island, they were affected less by some of the storm systems that came through, and so ended up with below average rainfall. So when we ended the wet season, drought was reduced and eliminated in some parts of the state, but unfortunately it was not completely removed over the leeward portions of Maui County and leeward Kohala on the Big Island. Now, when we look at run the numbers, crunch statistics, we had the wet season ended up with the 11th wettest in the last 30 years, so we just missed the top 10. Kauai had wetter than average conditions over most of the county. Lihue Airport had its 5th wettest October through April in the last 30 years. And on Oahu, leeward sides had near to below average rainfall, and most of the rest of Oahu had near to above average rainfall. Honolulu Airport had its 11th wettest October through April in the last 30 years. And over on Maui County, windward Maui County had mostly near to above average rainfall totals, but the rest of the area, as I mentioned earlier, had near to below average totals. And Kahului Airport was right in the middle, ranked 15th out of the last 30 years. And finally, on the Big Island, North and South Kohala districts, near to below average totals, but most of the rest of the Big Island had near to above average totals. And it was really, there was a lot of variability, with some months, especially like January, had very wet conditions over the windward side, and some months, such as April, were considerably drier. So you look at Hilo Airport, they had their 10th wettest October through April in the last 30 years. So looking forward for the dry season, the May through September timeframe, looking at the model consensus, and this frame captures just the July through September portion of it, the probabilities are tilted toward below normal rainfall for the Hawaiian Islands for the 2020 dry/warm season. So this is different from recent years, where actually 5 of the last 6 dry seasons have had wetter than average conditions. And so this year we're expecting very different conditions because in the last 6 years, really the top 4 wettest dry seasons were within that time frame, including the number 1, which was 2015, which a lot of us still remember quite well. So in terms of drought conditions, I think by the end of September, we're going to be seeing considerable drought development, especially over the leeward sections of the state. The one exception may be the Kona slopes of the Big Island, because they're the only leeward side in the state of Hawaii that has their wet season during the summer months. They get their normal afternoon showers during this time of year. And that's all I had. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And now we'll turn to Chris Brenchley, Director of the Central Pacific Hurricane Center, for the season outlook. Chris?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, Lieutenant Governor, mayors. Thank you. Good to see you. Appreciate your support. Also, good to hear and see from Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. They're at the Emergency Operations Center. Also from our partners at FEMA, NOAA Sea Grant, also at the Red Cross. Thank you all so much for taking the time to share these messages. They're important messages of preparedness as we approach the hurricane season. To everyone listening, good afternoon and aloha. I'd like to thank you for coming and listening to the Season Outlook press conference. This is an annual event. We're doing this virtually, but it's important to get the message out. And the main purpose for this press conference, again, is to increase public awareness of the threat and potential threat of hurricanes. We're grateful to the media, to our partners in the media, who are helping us get these important messages out to everyone. And so a couple of slides here to present our outlook for the 2020 hurricane season for the Central Pacific. This outlook is a collaborative effort with the Climate Prediction Center and Central Pacific Hurricane Center. We'll take a quick look back to 2019. We had an outlook of 5 to 8 tropical cyclones over the Central Pacific. As we look back at the season, we ended up with a total of 4 tropical cyclones. And as you can see from the chart, none of them directly impacted the islands with a landfall. Although, of course, as you know, hurricanes coming nearby can often bring severe weather, flash flooding, and big surf on our shores. The reason for the outlook was that El Nino at that time was expected to continue through the season. Thus, we expected more activity. The conditions weakened, the El Nino conditions weakened during the season, and this may have played a large role in lessening our tropical cyclones last year. You can see the history of the tropical cyclone activity over the Central Pacific. It varies from year to year. A lot of times there are very few, and some years we've even had 0. But as you can see, there are years such as a couple of years ago when we had well over our typical average, which is around 4 to 5 per year. So variability is important to realize, and preparation with respect to the threats of hurricanes it really should be the same year to year, even though we do have variability. So what do we look at? What do the Climate Prediction Center experts look at for these long-term forecasts? One of the main controlling factors or conditions that really seems to play a strong correlation role in how many tropical cyclones we have in the Central Pacific is ENSO. And this is more commonly known as the El Nino or La Nina. And that's when the temperatures along the equator area to the south and southeast of Hawaii become warmer than average or cooler than average. There's a strong correlation depending on those temperatures, how much tropical cyclone activity we have in the Central Pacific Basin. As you can see, we're near normal, so we call that an ENSO neutral condition. The forecast models expect that condition will continue through at least August this year as we go into our hurricane season. And those kind of conditions typically correlate with near normal tropical cyclone activity. However, there is increasing uncertainty as we go beyond August that we may have a higher than normal chance of a La Nina developing. And those are the blue bars going forward in time. As we get closer towards the September, October, November timeframe, the blue bar and the gray bar are near the same. So there's about an equal chance of having neutral conditions or having a La Nina develop late in the season. La Ninas are typically correlated with lower than normal tropical cyclones activity. So there's a little bit of uncertainty in the climate prediction models. So what can we expect this season? Officially, the outlook for 2020 Central Pacific hurricane season is that we will expect 2 to 6 tropical cyclones somewhere within the Central Pacific Hurricane Center area. It correlates to a 75% chance of a near to a below normal season and a 25% chance of an above normal season. Again, there's a higher than normal uncertainty, especially as we go later in the year. And this is due to the fact that the climate models are showing indications both ways of having neutral or La Nina conditions. And depending on that, could modify the forecasts, could modify the expectations as we go forward. However, as we think about this prediction, as we think about what this means to each of us living here in the in the state of Hawaii, we have to keep in mind that what would we do? Are we prepared if one of those tropical cyclones, just one of them, were to hit our home? And I think that's the important takeaway. Not the number of cyclones, it's very regardless of that number of cyclones that are predicted, but it's just a reminder to all of us as citizens here in the state of Hawaii to be prepared and to prepare now. As has been reiterated, the the hurricane season begins on June 1st and continues through the end of November. We typically see most of our cyclones or hurricanes occurring in the August and September timeframe, but it's good to be prepared sooner than later. Again, this prediction also doesn't specifically predict how many cyclones will affect Hawaii, but rather the larger basin. So we could have 6 tropical cyclones that stay away from Hawaii. We could have 2 tropical cyclones that both hit Hawaii. The impacts will vary depending on where those storms go. So I'd like to echo the messages that have been shared already for preparedness, learn about the hurricane hazards, including where to find the official weather forecasts and predictions, and make a plan so that you and your family are able to stay healthy and safe this hurricane season and beyond. And think of hurricane preparation activities as a continual thing. There's always something that we can do to be better prepared as we approach the 2020 hurricane season. Thank you for your attention, and we'll turn that time back over to John.
Thank you very much, Chris. I just realized that I didn't go over a few of the housekeeping items that I was going to cover at the beginning, one of which was that we would be saving all questions until the end now. If you do have any questions, you can type them into the question box. Dan will be going through those and pulling out questions to ask the panelists. I know I did get, while she's going through those, I did get a couple questions from directed for Maria. Maria, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, okay. 2 questions for you. One of which was, if someone is trying to enter a shelter, happens to have a fever, what will happen?
So we're going to designate one room to be an isolation room within the shelter. So the person will be directed to that room and will be seen by a nurse there and monitored. So that's one strategy for doing it. Of course, each county may come up with slightly different strategies, but the key thing is to isolate people who do have symptoms of being contagious.
Thank you, Maria. And the second question was, you had mentioned people should bring a gallon of water per day per person of water. How many days should people be prepared to stay in a shelter?
It's a really good question. And I can't give that a total answer, but I think that the issue here is that there could be so much destruction from a hurricane if it really did hit us directly. And so, or even if it brushed the state, right, could be so much damage. And it's really hard to know exactly how our infrastructure would be after that point. So it may be difficult once you're in a shelter to be able to return home. And it might take time for the road to clear and to be able to leave the shelter. So it could be quite a few days to safely go back home.
And I could easily see that question being directed to one of us at the Central Pacific Hurricane Center as well. And our answer would also be that a very fast-moving small hurricane, and a very large slow-moving that could bring a prolonged period. You could have something like Lane that decides to stop and threaten us offshore for days before moving again. Leanne, have we gotten any other questions submitted through the webinar interface?
Yes, we've had a couple. The first question is, later last year, it showed that there were 5 tropical cyclones in the Central Pacific, but now you're showing 4. Could you touch a little bit on what was that, why that was revised?
Sure. Chris, do you want to take that or do you want me to take that?
Go ahead, John.
Okay, that's actually a very astute one. When we sent out the annual summary at the end of last hurricane season, we had 5 that included Tropical Depression Kiko. We actually just had 1 bulletin on Kiko after it crossed 140 and CPHC took over before it had weakened. After the season's over, we go back and reanalyze the position of every cyclone every 6 hours to make sure we have an updated, the best possible location, intensity, size, everything associated with it for the historical record. When we did the reanalysis on Kiko, we realized it had weakened, it had dissipated before it crossed 140. So it, in the final best track analysis, we have it weakening at, I think, 139 west instead of across 140. So because it never crossed 140, it doesn't get counted in the Central Pacific Hurricane Center numbers, which is why we ended up with 4 tropical cyclones last year instead of 5.
All right, we have another question asking if you could talk about current ocean temperatures around the islands, and if above average, how could this enhance tropical cyclone threats?
Chris, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And we have noticed those warmer than normal temperatures around the islands for several years now. We can't seem to shake that condition. And it looks like there is a little bit of a warmer bias right now, not a huge bias, but a little bit warmer. If that were to continue, all that does is it gives it a little bit more fuel to be able to, a little bit more instability and fuel to be able to fuel a stronger tropical cyclone. If it were to come in the area, the cooler waters will interact with the storm to weaken it. So if the water temperature warms up and a storm happens to move in the direction of the state, then that's a bit of a concern because we don't have that cooler water around the islands to protect us.
Great, thank you. There's another question asking on the direction the storm comes, and does that change the impact to the islands?
That's a good question. There's a lot of variables that changes the impacts to the islands. Storms can come at us from any direction, but most commonly they'll come from the west, south, or east. That being said, if you're in the path of some of these tropical cyclones, no matter which side of the island that you're on, you could get very different and complex interactions with the islands. We saw that with Hurricane Lane, for example, where the center of Hurricane Lane was moving up from the south and dodged west of the Big Island, but the east side of the Big Island in the Hilo area saw tremendous amounts of rain, much more rain, flooding, destruction than on the west side of the Big Island, even though they were closer to the storm. There's a lot of complex interactions with especially the mountainous terrain of the islands. And so just because you see a storm coming at us from one direction or another doesn't mean that you should necessarily imply that when the last storm came at us from this direction, it did X, that it'll do that again. And so the important thing to remember is each storm, each hurricane comes with it with a different set of impacts. And to be prepared for any of those impacts, or all of them sometimes, to affect the area that you're in.
John, could I add to that answer?
Yeah,
Oh,
please.
can you hear me? Oh, okay. I just want to agree with what Chris said, and in terms of property, you're supposed to protect the entire envelope of your house, not assume that the storm is going to come from any one direction. So if you're going to try and protect your windows, you don't say, I'm just going to protect the south side of the house or the west side of the house for the windows. It's supposed to be 360 degrees around the entire envelope of the house. And also, like Chris mentioned, there's eddies, and then there's changing wind directions if the eye's nearby, and so there's a lot of factors, but every part of the property is supposed to be protected. Yeah.
We have another question asking, while we expect a near normal hurricane season, do we know what the Eastern Pacific is expecting, and has there already been any activity there?
The official outlook for the Eastern Pacific will be released tomorrow. They will release the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic hurricane season outlook tomorrow. I believe that'll be morning Hawaii time.
And also to address the early season activity, we've actually seen a couple early season systems spring up. We had a depression that formed last month in the Eastern Pacific, and then we had Arthur form in the Atlantic. Both unusual early season systems. I don't necessarily know what that means for future potential, but I guess it highlights the fact that tropical cyclones could form any time of the year, and that we have seen them most times throughout the year as well, beyond hurricane season.
Governor, if you are still around and able to answer questions, we had a question come in, and it's asking, if a hurricane were to knock out ports or airports, do you think the state would be able to maintain food supplies, ventilators, protective equipment, especially amid the continued strain on the supplies caused by this pandemic?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly that would be a high priority asset that we would be working very hard to protect and restore should it be impacted. One thing that has been a good result of this COVID-19 pandemic is there has been a lot of communication between private sector and the ports, getting a better understanding of important supply chains and improving communication. So I do think that that will benefit the overall response as we enter the hurricane season.
Thank you so much, Governor.
Yes.
All right, if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to put them into the question box and we can answer those. It does look like we have one more asking about the Western Pacific, if you had any outlook on what the season may be like out there.
Actually, we don't have an outlook for them just yet. Our counterparts at the Weather Forecast Office in Guam are working on one now, and that'll be released later this month.
We did have another question come in. I know it was touched on a little bit earlier, asking about what the URL or website location is where people can find the exact locations of shelters in their areas. So I don't know if anyone from HEMA would be able to answer this question if you're still available.
Right before. Yeah, this is the State Emergency Operations Center. Each county, that information can be found on each county's website.
So in terms of information available, we've thrown a lot at you through this webinar. It has been recorded. We'll be posting that through the NWS Honolulu YouTube channel and sharing that through social media. So that'll be available as a reference. We'll also send out an email to all the attendees, including a hard copy or a text copy of the season outlook, as well as the presentation slides from each of the speakers to have those as a reference. We'll also include additional information, including links to links that were referenced, such as links to the homeowner's handbook. So you can go to and download those yourselves. And we'll include information such as the county evacuation shelter information in that kind of wrap up email. And that seems like a good point to wrap up here. Another thing that we'll include will be points of contact for all the speakers if you have any follow-on questions or want more information. So we'll include that. Sounds like it'll be a pretty big email to look forward to. With that, I would like to thank all of our speakers for joining us. This has been a new experience. Hopefully it's met everyone's needs. I'm certainly happy to take feedback from anybody that has sat through here. You'll get when you get the wrap-up message, please let me know what you think and any suggestions for how we could do something like this in the future. And with that, we'll wrap up this webinar and say thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.